with Morrison, Media Outreach, and we are here with Lee Ranaldo and Leah singer. They are doing the Contre Joure performance today in Kolkata for the first time, I think.
Yes. First time in India as well.
Yes.
For me, yes.
Yeah, first time doing Contre Joure in India.
Yes, yes.
So, would you just explain the sonic architecture of the Contre Joure performance and how you create this space and the intimate space between the audience and yourself? You have been a legendary guitarist from Sonic Youth. So how this has evolved into this kind of musical ambience with the ambient lighting, and you have been a multimedia specialist. You have been working with analog movies and whatever. I feel that your music is something to do beyond boundaries, going into arts.
Mm-hmm.
So
let's start.
Beyond boundaries, going into art, for sure.
Yes.
And it's partially an outgrowth of living in New York and being involved in experimental media of different sorts, experimental cinema, experimental music, both rock music and improvisational music, and various other forms of art as well that we enjoy and are interested in and participate in sometimes.
But the other thing about this particular show, Contre Jour, that we do, it's developed since the early 90s, starting with analog film, moving into more of a digital format. But what happens is, because we have traveled so widely with this show, we've traveled from Tasmania to India to Europe to South America.
Nepal, actually.
Well, I spent some time in Nepal. But what I wanted to add to what Lee was saying is that every time we travel and present the work, in that city we're taking movies and collecting sound, and that gets folded back into the performance. So it's this organic evolution of a performance because it collects all of our travels and kind of folds it back in some way. So it's a pretty organic process. And each time it's done, of course, it's a live performance, so everything is up to chance, Something could break or something could explode, or so there's that element of the performance chance always with it. And Lee's playing live and responding differently every time he plays. So the show is different each time, and the films change because I have a library that I kind of pick and choose, and an edit comes together for a presentation. But I think it's key that the travel that we do, so like things that we shoot in India or sounds we collect in India, will inevitably get folded back in to the performance.
So it keeps evolving all the time.
It does.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And coming back to your improvisation, you grew up at a time when in the 60s it was a kind of a harvesting time where all great musicians and poets and great bands were playing. Woodstock happened, Beat Generation poets, Snyder and Ginsberg.
Mm-hmm.
So just tell us about the roots and how that has impacted in this enfolding and unfolding of various textures and that have come in your music.
Well, I mean, I suppose everyone is made up of their influences, and
yes.
I grew up in the period when rock music was really coming into its own, and I had a great interest in, first of all, Kerouac, and later in the other beat writers, Ginsberg and William Burroughs, and we were lucky enough to be friendly with Alan, and I was also friendly with William, and in the glory day, it was the glory days of rock music, and then when punk happened, I started being interested. At that point, I was in art school, and I was studying to be a visual artist because I make visual art as well. And the things that were happening with punk music in New York made me want to play guitar again and get more serious about it, or have more fun with it, again, And then it became this thing where, the three of us from Sonic Youth met up and started playing together, and you don't plan on something like that lasting for 30 years, but it just kind of took off into its own shape, in a sense, But being interested in art and culture and music and film, of course. We both studied experimental film and have made experimental films outside of what we present here. And in New York, a lot of people were experimenting with mixed media performances, and that's where this comes in. It's a mix of, there's a little bit of rock and roll, there's a little bit of like free improvisation, there's a little bit of sort of sound sculpture, and there's a little bit of experimental film, and also this theatrical kind of performance with the swinging guitar. So it's combining a lot of different things that between us we were interested in. And, for us, it's an experiment to see what we can do with taking these elements and combining them in interesting ways and making a unique kind of live happening.
Yes.
And there's a poetry as well.
Poetry as well. And I think you used this previously, I think I read about in Rolling Stones, I think, that you used different voices at some point of time of different writers and authors.
Yeah. In the earliest periods, I think in 1991 when you started with analog, that point of time.
And we used Brian Dyson's.
That wasn't 91. That was late. That was later.
Yeah, a little bit later.
Like maybe 10 years later, even. But when we first started out, I was reading my poetry during the concerts, and maybe singing a little bit, but mostly reading poems that I've written, and then. From there, I did an installation at some point in New York in this sound art gallery where I used, I thought it would be interesting rather than just using my voice and my words to use voices of other people. So sometimes I was recording people's voices, and then I was taking voices off like spoken word records or from interviews with people I admired, writers, poets, authors. And then including Brian Gysin, we found some recordings of him reading his poems. And so our performance went from me speaking my poems to other voices, and we were making kind of a fractured narrative of like, you would hear different people saying different things. And whenever you hear 2 or 3 people talk after each other, it becomes a conversation, even if they're taken from 30 years apart or something like that. So we were using other voices. There's still other voices in the current program. There's the voice of the artist Robert Smithson, who I'm really involved with and interested in, and probably some other voices are still in there too. And it seemed more interesting at a certain point to stop it being my voice and having the whole thing being, my guitar and my voice, and opening it up to a wider scope.
I want to ask one thing is that, like you said, that your music is very much influenced by your travels. So, before 2 years back, we were battling with the pandemic. So, what was your inspiration during that time? Because a lot of people would want to know, how did artists cope with that situation, and what kept you making more music
and visuals. We actually did a pandemic show virtually online in Texas. Through somebody in Texas at a university set it up for us through Zoom. We sort of directed how we wanted it. It was an installation. So not a performance, obviously, because we couldn't travel. But we did a great installation with multi projections, multi-audio track. And it was very immersive. It was done in a university setting. And so the students did get to see it with masks and whatnot. And of course, the pandemic prevented live performance. So we couldn't go out like everybody else couldn't go out. So we did do that. We sort of found a way to actually get something new done. And so that was inspiring. And we did a benefit that was live. We did it in New York for a children's music school. We did a taping, like a live stream situation. And I think Lee did a live stream with Georg.
I did a live stream for Vienna, for a group in Vienna.
So we found ways to work, in a more live setting, but a live setting on Zoom.
But it was hard. And, I think a lot of artists kind of regrouped, not even just artists, everybody kind of regrouped during that time. Because, at least for us in New York, maybe here too, but we were mostly stuck inside our apartment in downtown Manhattan. And, so you had a lot of time to think about things or maybe make some sort of private art. We weren't doing public performances, but we were regrouping in different ways. The pandemic kind of was a moment to step back and
reflect on.
Yeah, maybe reflect or maybe figure out how to come out of it.
But there were themes in the pandemic like loneliness, for example, right?
Yeah,
so people were alone,
Yep.
isolation. So I think between the two of us, both working together and working as individual artists, we approached it sometimes the same and sometimes differently, which means that for me, I didn't necessarily want to do a very pandemic program or a very obvious, I didn't want pictures of people in masks or, I didn't need to point to COVID to understand loneliness. COVID enhanced those
but
feelings.
it was already there.
Right. So it was a way for me to look at the emotional piece and the reality of COVID through a different filter. But I was always very interested in sort of isolated spaces, empty spaces, abandoned spaces. That was already in my vocabulary. So COVID just enhanced that without me having to sort of pointedly address the pandemic. But every artist had to react differently. It was such a shock, and we were dealing with, very practical things. Like where do we get food? For one moment, we were having trouble getting groceries, so
and New York was badly affected at
Yeah.
very bad.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of loss, of lives.
Yeah,
and,
especially in the first months.
Yeah, it was
really
very
bad.
fearing. We were fearful, but I would say, it's
We are coming back to life.
it's weird being in the post-pandemic period because
it has never happened like this.
like we're in India.
Yeah.
What are we doing in India?
Yeah.
Wasn't there just we were so scared to go outside our front door. Now we've traveled across the world to come to Kolkata, so there's that disconnect too of time has been completely compressed.
Yeah,
Yep.
everyone feels that.
Yeah.
Our show, in fact, was called in Texas. Yesterday, what was our show called?
Yesterday was a year ago?
Yeah, yesterday was a year ago. Because it's this idea of time being
Lost.
Talking
in a
about
way.
and
talking about
compressed.
time, a lot of the photography and cinematic things which you use personally, I've done a little bit of research on that. I was seeing non-linearity is one of the main items which you try to put into the structure of the sonic landscape, and unpredictability as well, because life itself is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
Yeah, of
We
course.
don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but live in the moment.
Well, there's the structure of the films for Contre Jour are clearly not linear.
Yeah.
However, they are hinged by certain things, often a visual hinge that brings them all together.
Yeah.
And also, I think that this idea of a fractured narrative, I think you can still tell a story or give an impression. Yeah, I mean, it's not a linear beginning, middle, and end, but there's certain things that come back. My work has a kind of self-referentialness to it. You see things come back, you see, is it real or did that happen before? There's a kind of, again, working with a time-based medium. There's sometimes a kind of a sci-fi quality to it, or at least I see that, a kind of future. But, I think also I used to describe our show as if you were in a car driving and you're passing all the landscapes and you're looking in this window and then in that window and then in this
And everything
window.
is passing.
Yeah, and it's all fleeting and disconnected, fragmented. So in a way, that's how we go through life too. It's like,
Is this somewhat inspired by surrealism?
I mean, I certainly I'll adhere to surrealism. I like this idea of unaltered reality and, you know, a kind of mysticism even in a way. But there's, you know, also something I learned very early on with our performances is that it's like an eyewitness report. You know, if you ask 10 people to describe an accident, they each, or an event, they each have a different interpretation of what they
like the Russian
think they saw.
Like
Yeah, exactly.
That, Akira Kurosawa movie.
Yeah,
like
yes.
everyone has a different interpretation of truth. Truth is subjective.
Right, of course,
Yep.
and that's how people walk away from one of our shows.
Yeah.
So some people see things that I never saw before, or some people interpret it in a certain way or understand it in a different way. And also, too, it's cultural. So here we are in India. I mean, I'm interested to see a kind of reaction to what we do, because you come with a different set of precedents, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, like, cultural exchanges also happen. Like, as you said, like, you've been to Nepal, so definitely it's a very rich cultural country. So like, a lot of elements of the mountains would come in.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
doubt.
No, it depends on where you are.
Yeah.
You know, the place is where you are is always, you know, important. I mean, look at, it's my first time in Kolkata, and I'm only getting very fleeting impressions. I've been here 1.5 days, but you know I can sense what it's like here and how it would affect you. You know, so and you would feel the
also
same way in New
enjoy
York.
Rajasthan, the trip to Rajasthan.
yes.
It's a colorful place.
Yes,
place
and
for
India
photographs.
is a remarkable
Tremendous
place.
photographs.
Like, it's so different. Like, if you
Yes.
go to north,
With the
if you
deserts,
go to the east, you go to
mountains,
south, it's
seas.
completely
Oh,
Yeah.
different.
absolutely.
You
Yeah.
feel like you're in a different world.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
India is
Indeed,
very complex.
6 months to start
Yeah.
exploring
it's
it
very
all.
complex.
We've only got 3 weeks.
America is like that too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
it's very
absolutely.
true.
It's a very regional place, and India is a very regional place. So
That's why we are disconnected. Okay, so coming back to just last 2 questions. One is the work which you did with Smithsonian Museum. You did some work with Smithsonian?
I'm doing some work.
Okay.
That's I interview artists.
Okay.
So I write. I'm not a critic, but I write about basically artists and their process, and I'm doing some oral history projects.
That was interesting.
Yeah, so oral history as a way, I mean, I have a background in radio, so I enjoy just an oral, you know, even without a visual. So these are oral histories collected only through audio, so through storytelling and recording. And it's a way to, you know, to give a legacy to it's American visual artists at the Smithsonian. And it's a way of creating a library and an archive, so you can go back and, you know, and listen to the words of how they made their own work and the work they did in that moment of when they were working. So it's a classic archive, but it's oral history.
Yeah. And finally, the question is using the screen as a kind of a mirror, and there's a lot of light and shadow play with it. So how that idea with the sound, you integrated that, the screen as a kind of a mirror of reflection of.
Well, especially because Lee's with the guitar very dramatic.
Yes,
you know, it's
that's
very.
what we're seeing. Yeah.
And you'll see some of Lee. Obviously, you'll see Lee live, but you'll see Lee on the screen from previous shows we've done that I just filmed. So you get this Doppler effect with the shadow, but. You always like to see it as early cinema.
There's shadows on the screen,
Yeah.
and then there's my shadow cast on the screen, and there's me live, and there's me on the screen.
It's kind of early cinema.
This is the newest version of our piece, and we're playing with some meta. You know, versions there. Yeah.
Yeah, it also kind of reminded me of early cinema, actually.
Yeah.
Of
like
what?
Early cinema.
Oh yeah. The earliest cinema is
20s.
shadow casting. Yeah.
That's
That's definitely a reference.
Yes.
And in Indian culture, you have a shadow play.
I think in Rajasthan, they
In
have
Rajasthan,
like
like shadow puppets.
Oh yeah, like the Balinese.
Yes, similar. Yeah.
Balinese dance and all that also.
Yeah.
So you are off to the Zero Festival in Arunachal Pradesh now?
Yes, tomorrow.
Yep.
And Farhan
that
and
would
all
be
the other
another
people will be
landscape
playing.
altogether.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
yeah.
we'll
Be playing with some great
great-
That's beautiful.
Yes.
Farhan Akhtar and
I hear there's a great lineup.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
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 Yeah, no, we look forward to that. We'll be presenting Contre Joure a little differently because they have an LED screen as opposed to a projection with a beam. But I also wanted to add about shadows is that with a shadow is very ambiguous, and with an ambiguous shape or figure, you can, anyone can insert themselves into it.
Yeah.
That's the
You can
point of a
identify.
shadow. Yeah, exactly. So that's something that I'm interested in.
Yes. So thank you very much for giving us time. It's
Yes.
a pleasure
Thank you.
talking with you and so many varied aspects of putting together a Contre Jour.
Yeah.
We can learn a lot from this performance itself, and I
And
look forward
just
to.
the last question: who's your favorite musician of all time?
That's a big question.
I said
It's
you
too
can
hard to
only sing
answer.
baritone.
I can never answer that question. There's too
any
many.
particular group you like, or
I love Bob Dylan. I love the Beatles. I love
Rough and Rowdy Ways. Still a good album.
I love a lot of different artists and musicians from all different periods. But so I never like to answer that question because it's hard to
Also,
single one out.
And we have a lot of friends that are musicians that we love, that we go see. And that's a difficult one because it's almost like, it's hard to be a fan, right? I mean, because a fan is, you can be a fan of so many things, and it's difficult to,
but then
distill
coming
it.
in touch with people and having this human contact and
That makes a big
friendship,
difference.
companionship
Inspiration
is, I think, the
aspect,
only way.
Yeah, that makes a
rather
big
than becoming,
difference.
just a fan.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you for this
Okay.
handsome
Pleasure.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
thank
for
you so
sharing
much.
everything.
We look
Okay,
forward
pleasure.
to tonight.
Yeah.